Now recording.
Hello and welcome to the Temple Mount Podcast. My name is Ghost, formerly known as Shogun, and today joining me again is my good friend Teos, and this will be the third episode in our ongoing series about the apostles of Jesus Christ, drawing from the very interesting source of information, which is the enigmatic and mysterious Urantia book. You can find previous podcasts about the Urantia book and the apostles, as well as many other subjects on the Temple Mount Podcast on YouTube and BitChute. And of course, if you are a real keener, you can find hundreds of other great episodes under the Roundtable podcast on YouTube and BitChute as well. But most importantly, please join us if you're hearing this on the Temple Mount Discord server so that you can be on a podcast of your own and participate in these live recordings. Thank you to the live audience, but thank you especially to Teos for joining me. How are you today, sir?
Doing good, brother. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to continue our series on the apostle. Every time we do these readings, I'm always walking away with something new. So I'm really excited to see what that is today.
Absolutely. And in the past, I've found that these podcasts are presentation style, which is a great format. I don't feel that you need my questions to prompt you because you have the information you want to relay, and I'm happy to just sit quietly and listen. However, if I discern that there's a moment, where a question may be helpful, I'll offer it. But if you want to just take the mic and run, don't feel that you need to give me any time on the mic. It's entirely up to you. So that being said, please take us into this any way you feel is appropriate.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Shogun. So today we're going to be continuing in paper 139 from the Urantia book. The chapter is the 12 Apostles. Our first series, we went over Simon and Andrew. In the second series, we covered the sons of Zebedee, James Zebedee, and John Zebedee. So today we're going to begin with Philip the Curious. Philip was the fifth apostle to be chosen, being called when Jesus and his first four apostles were on their way from John's rendezvous on the Jordan to Cana of Galilee. Since he lived in Bethsaida, Philip had for some time known of Jesus, but it had not occurred to him that Jesus was a really great man until that day in the Jordan Valley, when he said, "Follow me." Philip was also somewhat influenced by the fact that Andrew, Peter, James, and John had accepted Jesus as the deliverer. Philip was 27 years of age when he joined the apostles. He had been recently married, but he had no children at this time. The nickname which the apostles gave him signified curiosity. Philip was always wanting to be shown. He never seemed to be very far into any proposition. He was not necessarily dull, but he lacked imagination. This lack of imagination was the great weakness of his character. He was a commonplace and matter-of-fact individual. When the apostles were organized for service, Philip was made steward. It was his duty to see that they were at all times supplied with provisions, and he was a good steward. His strongest characteristic was his methodical thoroughness. He was both mathematical and systematic. Philip came from a family of 7, 3 boys and 4 girls. He was the next to the oldest, and after the resurrection, he baptized his entire family into the kingdom. Philip's people were fisherfolk. His father was a very able man, a deep thinker, but his mother was a very mediocre family. Philip was not a man who could be expected to do big things, but he was a man who could do little things in a big way, do them well and acceptably. Only a few times in 4 years did he fail to have food on hand to satisfy the needs of all. Even the many emergency demands attendant put upon the life they lived seldom found him unprepared. The commissary department of the apostolic family was intelligently and efficiently managed. The strong point about Philip was his methodical reliability. The weak point in his makeup was his utter lack of imagination, the absence of the ability to put 2 and 2 together to obtain 4. He was mathematical in the abstract, but not constructive in his imagination. He was almost entirely lacking in certain types of imagination. He was the typical, everyday, and commonplace average man. There were a great many such men and women among the multitudes who came to hear Jesus teach and preach, and they derived great comfort from observing one like themselves elevated to an honored position in the councils of the Master. They derived courage from the fact that one like themselves had already found a high place in the affairs of the kingdom. And Jesus learned much about the way some human minds function as he so patiently listened to Philip's foolish questions and so many times complied with his steward's requests to be shown. The one quality about Jesus which Philip so continuously admired was the Master's unfailing generosity. Never could Philip find anything in Jesus which was small or stingy, and he worshipped this ever-present and unfailing liberality. There was little about Philip's personality that was impressive. He was often spoke of as Philip of Bethsaida, the town where Andrew and Peter live. He was almost without discerning vision. He was unable to grasp the dramatic possibilities of a given situation. He was not pessimistic. He was not simply prosaic. He was not pessimistic. He was simply prosaic. He was also greatly lacking in spiritual insight, and he would not hesitate to interrupt Jesus in the midst of one of the Master's most profound discourses to ask an apparently foolish question. But Jesus never reprimanded him for such thoughtlessness. He was patient with him and considerate of his inability to grasp the deeper meanings of the teaching. Jesus well knew that, if he once rebuked Philip for asking these annoying questions, he would not only wound this honest soul, but such a reprimand would so hurt Philip that he would never again feel free to ask questions. Jesus knew that on his worlds of space there were untold billions of similar, slow-thinking mortals, and he wanted to encourage them all to look to him and always to feel free to come to him with their questions and problems. After all, Jesus was really more interested in Philip's foolish questions than in the sermon he might be preaching. Jesus was supremely interested in men, all kinds of men. The apostolic steward was not a good public speaker, but he was a very persuasive and successful personal worker. He was not easily discouraged. He was a plodder and very tenacious in anything he undertook. He had the great and rare gift of saying, "Come and see." He was not a dogmatic preacher who exhorted his hearers to go, do this, and do that. He met all situations as they arose in his work with, "Come, come with me, I will show you the way." And that is always the effective teaching in all forms and phases of teaching. Even parents may learn from Philip the better way of saying to their children, not "go do this and go do that," but rather "come with us while we show and share with you the better way." The inability of Philip to adapt himself to a new situation was well shown when the Greeks came to him at Jerusalem, saying, "Sir, we desire to see Jesus." Now, Philip would have said to any Jew asking such a question, "Come." But these men were foreigners, and Philip could remember no instructions from his superiors regarding such matters. So the only thing he could think to do was to consult the chief Andrew. And then they both escorted the inquiring Greeks to Jesus. Likewise, when he went into Samaria preaching and baptizing believers, as he had been instructed by his master, he refrained from laying hands on his converts in token of their having received the Spirit of truth. This was done by Peter and John, who presently came down from Jerusalem to observe his work in behalf of the mother church. Philip went on through trying times of the master's death, participated in the reorganization of the 12, and was the first to go forth to win souls for the kingdom outside of the immediate Jewish ranks, being most successful in his work for the Samaritans and in all his subsequent labors in behalf of the gospel. Philip's wife, who was an efficient member of the woman's corps, became actively associated with her husband in his evangelistic work. And after their flight from Jerusalem, after their flight from the Jerusalem persecutions, his wife was a fearless woman. She stood at the foot of Philip's cross, encouraging him to proclaim the glad tidings even to his murderers. And when his strength failed, she began the recital of the story of salvation by faith in Jesus and was silenced only when the irate Jews rushed upon her and stoned her to death. Their eldest daughter, Leah, continued their work, later on becoming the renowned prophetess of Hierapolis. Philip, the one-time steward of the 12, was a mighty man in the kingdom, winning souls wherever he went, and he was finally crucified for his faith and buried at Hierapolis. I'm going to stop there for a moment because I think there was a few things there I think worth talking about before we just immediately continue on. I think it's absolutely amazing every time we go through this. I'm reminded of the deep level of connectivity that this particular reading gives on the apostles as making them ordinary men, but also relatable in a way that it almost reminds you of people that you've met or even yourself at different times. And I just wonder if there's anybody listening that would like to stop and talk about Philip for a second before we continue on. If you have any questions or have any comments, now would be the time to do it.
I personally do not yet have any questions or comments and would like to hear you to continue to elaborate before I would ask any questions. Or if there's anyone who has a question at this point, please raise it now.
I have one question I laid out. What are we reading?
We are reading from the Urantia book right now, from
Urantia book. Okay, thank
paper
you.
139. Yeah. So, I really appreciate the aspect of Philip inspiring so many people because of their relatability to him, and I also think that there's so many times that people of our friend group here might be assumed to interrupt things to ask silly questions or whatever. And it reminds me of a few different people, but that same quality here, it cautions me to be more patient and to be more accepting of those questions, right? And it's just, I think it's super awesome, the display of interaction between Christ and one of the apostles. So I'm going to continue on here unless somebody has something. Oh, wait a second. Okay. Honest Nathaniel. Nathaniel, the sixth and last of the apostles, to be chosen by the Master himself, was brought to Jesus by his friend Philip. He had been associated in several business enterprises with Philip and with him, and was on the way down to see John and the Baptist when they encountered Jesus. When Nathanael joined the apostles, he was 25 years old and was the next to the youngest of the group. He was the youngest of a family of 7, was unmarried, and the only support of aged and infirmed parents, with whom he lived at Cana. His brothers and sisters were either married or deceased, and none lived there. Nathanael and Judas Iscariot were the 2 best educated men among the 12. Nathanael had thought to become a merchant. Jesus did not himself give Nathanael a nickname, but the 12 soon began to speak of him in terms that signified honesty and sincerity. He was without guile, and this was his great virtue. He was both honest and sincere. The weakness of his character was his pride. He was very proud of his family, his city, his reputation, and his nation, all of which is commendable if it is not carried too far. But Nathanael was inclined to go to extremes with his personal prejudices. He was disposed to prejudge individuals in accordance with his personal opinions. He was not slow to ask the question, even before he had met Jesus, can anything good come out of Nazareth? But Nathanael was not obstinate, even if he was proud. He was quick to reverse himself when he once looked into Jesus' face. In many respects, Nathaniel was the odd genius of the 12. He was the apostolic philosopher and dreamer, but he was a very practical sort of dreamer. He alternated between seasons of profound philosophy and periods of rare and droll humor. When in the proper mood, he was probably the best storyteller among the 12. Jesus greatly enjoyed hearing Nathanael's discourse on things both serious and frivolous. Nathanael progressively took Jesus and the kingdom more seriously, but never did he take himself seriously. The apostles all loved and respected Nathanael. He got along with them splendidly, excepting Judas Iscariot. Judas did not think Nathanael took his apostleship sufficiently seriously, and once had the temerity to go in secret to Jesus and lodge complaints against him. Said Jesus, "Judas, watch carefully your steps. Do not over magnify your office. Who of us is competent to judge his brother? It is not the Father's will that his children should partake only of the serious things of life. Let me repeat, I have come that my brethren in the flesh may have joy, gladness, and life more abundantly. Go then, Judas, and do well that which has been entrusted to you, but leave Nathanael, your brother, to give account of himself to God." And the memory of this, with that of many similar experiences, long lived in the self-deceiving heart of Judas Iscariot. Many times when Jesus was away on the mountain with Peter, James, and John, and things were becoming tense and tangled among the apostles, when even Andrew was in doubt about what to say to his disconsolate brethren, Nathanael would relieve the tension by a bit of philosophy or a flash of humor, good humor too. Nathanael's duty was to look after the families of the 12. He was often absent from the apostolic councils, for when he heard that the sickness or anything out of the ordinary had happened to one of his charges, he lost no time in getting to that home. The 12 rested securely in the knowledge that their family's welfare was safe in the hands of Nathanael. Nathanael most revered Jesus for his tolerance. He never grew weary of contemplating the broad-mindedness and generous sympathy of the Son of Man. Nathanael's father, Bartholomew, died shortly after Pentecost, after which this apostle went into Mesopotamia and India, proclaiming the good tidings of the kingdom and baptizing believers. His brethren never knew what became of their one-time philosopher, poet, and humorist. But he also was a great man in the kingdom and did much to spread his master's teachings, even though he did not participate in the organization of the subsequent Christian church. Nathanael died in India. Nathanael the Honest. Yeah, I can't express how much I absolutely love the description of character from these readings and how much it stands out to me from anything else that I ever encounter. So I really enjoy that. If anybody has any comments or questions, please feel free to speak up. If not, we'll probably make this a short recording and then a short reading and session, because there's not really much else to say past that. That's kind of what I want to be the main focus of the conversation, is just about them as people. And yeah.
So, Tios, I will ask a question, and I can only ask it at a meta level, right? Because I'll need to re-listen to these podcasts in order to fully absorb the information which you're sharing. Just due to the nature of the way my mind works, I need to listen to these podcasts before I can fully integrate them. But what I'd like to ask you is more of a broad question. This is now our third in an ongoing series about the apostles, and I think all of this is objectively interesting and useful. But I'd just like you to reflect on what is it that you think you gain in terms of your Christian faith through such a detailed understanding of the apostles, because I can tell you that, as you probably know, for most Christians, they don't really consider the apostles. They just think about God, Jesus, maybe Mary, and the apostles are kind of peripheral. It seems to me what you're proposing is that the apostles have a very fundamental and key role in understanding the message of Christ. And so I'd just like to invite you to reflect on why you derive so much benefit from this analysis of the apostles, which, most Christians, probably couldn't even name the 12 apostles, let alone tell you anything about them.
Well, exactly. Exactly. I think it for me, you have to set aside the heretical nature of the source, which is the Urantia book, and it almost becomes a source of just pure literal enjoyment, and something that you read as literature. And I think that when you step outside of some of the more dogmatic beliefs that kind of I think many of us who belong to Christianity understand what I'm talking about. You embrace this thing and you compare it to the collection of information that you have. It's astonishing in its own right, the level of detail that exists about these men that seemingly doesn't exist anywhere else. And so you have to kind of challenge yourself for a second and really come to grips with whether that challenges your faith or not. And that is just an immediate conflict right away, right? That's the first thing when you start to read this that you have to make amends with yourself. And for me, I just do that by going back to where Jesus tells the apostles, like, how can anyone be talking about me and lead you astray, right? So that's where I'm at. Like, I'm looking at Jesus, I'm looking into Jesus, I'm here focused, we're talking about Jesus. And so I just jump right over that, and I find relatability in a way that reminds me that Christ loves us in our imperfections, right? And I think that there is, like you hinted at also too, a greater mystery that exists in the nature of each man, right? It's a representation of humanity, really. And it's hard to see the greater picture as we're going slowly through this process, but you're absolutely right that once we're done and we have the full picture, I think that's what's really going to stand out to people, is that these men come from highly educated places, to laymen, to craftsmen, to fishermen, and these were the people who essentially the foundation of what we call Christianity was established on, was on their backs. And all of them except for one was crucified and martyred in the same way. And like you said, we don't even really oftentimes know where they came from. Where were they born? Right? Who was their parents? I just think it's satisfying to our brains to at least have some kind of answer, right? Our brain seeks answers once we ask the question, right? Once the question raises, where was Philip, from? Who was his parents? How did he meet Jesus? It's amazing. I don't know. I just think it's super interesting. Really enjoyed your question, though.
So one more chance for audience questions, and then I'll ask if Tios has any further information to share.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you, everybody, for coming and listening. And I look forward to continuing this series with you, Shuggin. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share these insights that claim to be from an angelic source into the lives of the apostles with other people. I think it's really cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tios. So if I could ask you a question, and it's an elaboration and also a summarization of the podcast so far. what particular lessons do you believe that Christians like myself should take from these two particular apostles that may be specific to their example or message and may have been missed by those who are focusing exclusively on the character of Jesus or God and not necessarily on the apostles? In other words, what do these two apostles, and I realize this may be redundant to what you've already said, and I apologize if so, but what do these two apostles have to teach us that we Christians can incorporate into our own lives?
Yeah, I think that the one thing that I walked away from the first reading was don't be afraid to have an imagination. Don't be afraid to make decisions and choices, right? And to take responsibility. You don't always have to run to someone else uh, and ask them permission. Don't be afraid to have an imagination, right? Think outside of the box, and also that that from Jesus's interaction with Philip, that you should have more patience with people who ask questions. That way, you don't um, stunt their ability or their feeling of the comfortableness of asking questions at all, right? And that's obviously something that we talk about in the community a lot. I'm personally well known for stomping out askers in a very way, especially if it seems like it's aggressive question asking, or if it's there's a word that I'm struggling to find, but yeah, that's what I would take away from Philip. And then Nathaniel, um, I think in the part where it was talking about judging your brothers and how Judas Iscariot had come and had been so concerned about Nathaniel's position, and Jesus' rebuking of him, I think stood out to me, right? And that Nathaniel went about his life, and that none of the other apostles knew what ever happened to him. I mean, think about that. They had no idea where he went or what happened, but that he continued to do his mission and his work into India and died there. And was not a part of the group or the establishment of what we would call Christianity, but had his own impact in a part of the world that we don't even talk about as Christians. We don't even understand the impact that he had in India and in that part of the world. I think that's just utterly amazing. I think it's a subject that I could do a whole podcast on my own about, talk about Nathaniel going into India and spreading the good news. How amazing is that?
Indeed. How amazing indeed. Praise Jesus. Does anybody have a question for Mr. Tios about the apostles or about the subject?
I do. How has reading that book, the ranch book, how has that affected your life?
Well, I mean, I don't know life without it. I encountered the book at 15 or 16 years old, and was began my journey with it, and devoured the whole front half of the book, which is like 1,000 pages. Just devoured it, and then turned the page and got to the part where it starts talking about Jesus, and I freaked out, and I just couldn't even believe that I had been so befuddled and bamboozled, and now they're gonna try to trick me into believing in Jesus. Like, no way, I can't even believe that. Like, I wasted all my time reading this book, and and then I came back and read it again when I was like 18, and started the beginning and got to the end again, and finished it. It wasn't what I thought it would be, and it really changed my perspective of Christ and of the most. It spoke immediately to most of the problems that I saw in Christianity and in the world around me. It spoke to me. It was like, here's the reason why this is happening, and I could totally understand. And I went through another phase, Kasheka, and I love your question, where I kind of stepped away from it because I found out that it could be edited. That is part of the legacy of the book, is that it's allowed to be edited, especially in scientific areas, so that it stays accurate. And I just was really upset about that for a little while, and I just couldn't get over it. And so I didn't read or listen to the book or have anything to do with it for a few months. And one day I'm subscribed on Reddit to the forums, and a person asked, what's your sincere thoughts on the Urantia book? And I went through, and there was about 30, 40 people who had responded. And I started scrolling down through the responses, and every single response was exactly the same, or in the same vein, where the message was simply that there was no other comprehensive, collective, complete narrative of what's happening to us in this existence in the world. This is it. It's the only book that claims to be the fifth apocalyptic revelation to mankind from aliens, and it is an entire collection of 2,000-page document that explains everything that's happening in our existence in a comprehensive, rational, reasonable way. And I went, wow, that's exactly how I feel about it. That's what I think. It is. It's the only book in all of our literature that explains what's happening to us in a cohesive way, from beginning to end. Where we're from, where we're going, everything's there. Right? There's nothing else. Everything else has holes. It's doesn't make any sense. It's not rational. But this book, nothing left unturned. Everything is answered for, from the problem of evil to the nature of God, to the nature of free will. It's all there. It's all covered. The answers, it's all there. It's just, do you accept the truth that's given or not? So that's given me a lot of peace, Kasheka. Thank you for your question. It was really awesome.
Thanks for your answer.
So, Shogun, unless somebody else has some questions, I'm totally comfortable with wrapping this up, and I like that we keep these short, and we can push on to the next episodes. Man, I'm really loving doing this. So, if you would
I'm
be so
loving it as
kind as
well.
to.
I would love to do it as well. So if this is an appropriate place to end it, I think one thing that's great about these podcasts is they are short and sweet, meaning dense and valuable information, and shorter than many of our podcasts. I think that's a good thing. So I'm going to open up to the audience to ask any questions, and then I'm going to give Tios a chance to make a final statement.
So I'll take the opportunity to make a final statement. I would say that if you find this subject interesting, or the book interesting, to do your own research, to look into it, come to your own conclusions, but then read the book. Start in the beginning and buckle up because it's a long book, but give it a chance and let the book speak for itself.
Well,
Shogun, if you'd be so kind as to wrap this up for us and walk us out, I would really appreciate that. Thank you, brother. I love you.
Thank you, Tios. This has been great. I would encourage everybody to study the Urantia book, whether that means just Googling it and reading the Wikipedia on what it is, or actually reading it, or reading the whole thing, or listening to some of our past podcasts. There's a lot of channeled material that I consider totally worthless or even antichrist deception. My current perception is the Urantia book does not fit into that category. I actually consider the Urantia book, from my current perception, which is less than 100%, but to an 80 to 90% confidence interval as I can estimate it, it is a very valuable source of information, not equivalent to things like the channeled Pleiadian, Arcturian, New Age stuff that I largely consider nonsense. So far, everything I've heard from the Urantia book has been consistent with my understanding of truth, and has added rather than distracted from such truth. It is up to you to make that attribution for yourself, but I hope that you will continue to listen to these podcasts, the past podcasts in the Urantia Book and Apostles series, and future episodes on this topic. And please do join us on the Temple Mount Discord server. Like, follow, subscribe, and listen to and share our podcasts on the YouTube and BitChute channel, Temple Mount Podcast, Temple Mount Official. And if you have gone through our hundreds of episodes on those channels and you want more, there are also hundreds of episodes under the Roundtable podcast channels. All of this can be found in the hashtag TMP podcast announcements or pinned messages of the TMP server. And if you are listening to this as a live audience member or someone on YouTube or BitChute, understand that you are more than welcome to come here and not only be part of these conversations, but do a podcast yourself. So I hope you will take us up on that invitation. I don't think you'll regret it. Dios, thank you for your time and your insight, and thank you to the live audience as well as those listening on other platforms. God bless. Have a good night. We're going to jump back to the Templar's Tavern, and as we traditionally say, I highly recommend that you do not take the mark of the beast. That's up to you. That being said, God bless, good night, and I'll see you all in the Templar's Tavern. Thank you to our recorder. You can send the recording to our uploader, who is of course Dude Missile. I will now banish the Craigbot, which will officially end the recording, and then we will jump to the Templar's Tavern. Thank you again to all involved. Good night and God bless.